That's a great question. Yeah, it's definitely separate from the Section 8 program under HUD. There are specific programs for those that were in the foster care system. There are stipulations that kind of delineate what qualifies. And essentially, a lot of these are through an independent living program. So, as that youth or young adult is getting to that age of 18, or they're, have an emancipation from the courts, they would work with their caseworker. So that's kind of like their main liaison, their main point of contact that's kind of helping, make these connections. So they notify their caseworker that they're looking to be part of one of these independent living programs and receive a housing voucher. The federal level has a certain amount of allocation towards these housing vouchers for the foster youth programs. And then they delineate down to each state and each locality to figure out.
Welcome to the Yacht Captain Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Kidd, where every week we dive deep into conversations with real estate pros, business owners, and maritime professionals about their mindset and journey to success. Please help support us on our journey and our channel by liking, subscribing, and commenting below so we can help you in your journey to success. How you doing today? Scott Kidd, the Yacht Captain Investor Podcast. Today I have a new good friend of mine, Dairius. How you doing today, Dairius?
Hey, how's it going, Scott? It's great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Oh yeah, I really appreciate you being here, and you have a pretty interesting background story. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'll kind of give the high level background story, and then we can dive into whatever direction. My name is Dairius Kawewehi. Most people just call me DK. The name's kind of complicated. I'm born and raised from Hawaii, and had a kind of an unconventional childhood. I grew up a majority of my life in the foster care system. So I was put in the foster care system around 4 years old, and I was there for about 9 to 10 years, and ultimately adopted as a teenager. And so from that background, I had many people in my life that kind of helped put me down, a good path, a good trajectory to kind of really change, where my life was heading. And so because of all those unsung heroes in my life, I wanted to like dedicate, the rest of my life to serving others, right? And so that, for me, when I was in high school, led me down a path to look into joining the military. I learned about the RTC program. I specifically chose the Navy one, and I went to Purdue University, studied mechanical engineering, graduated, commissioned into the Navy as a nuclear engineer officer, serving on submarines. I did that for about 8 years or so. Ultimately left service about 2 years ago now. Man, I can't believe it's been 2 years already. Left military service mainly because during the last couple of years, I had kind of a calling of, how can I kind of come back to the community that I originally came from, right? How can I help support other youth and young adults that are aging out of the foster care system that don't have, a next step for them? And so that led me out of the military. I've been pursuing, pathways in real estate, a number of mentors and communities that I'm part of, and using real estate as a way towards financial freedom so I can help, kind of the community that I came from. And that's kind of led me to where I am today. I'm a federal contractor as my day job. And then as a business, I'm a commercial real estate investor. And then I'm starting a nonprofit that's helping with affordable housing for youth and young adults aging out of the foster care system.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. It's a very unique strategy, because I know I have a friend of mine that comes to our meetups in West Palm Beach, and she has opened she had an 11 unit, I think, and she had some aged out foster care people in there, and I think it was you that was telling me that they're supported up until they're about 21, and then after that, there's pretty much you're on your own kind of thing. Even though the foster care system may not necessarily, depending on the state, I guess, each one of them gives you a different types of benefits. And I would imagine that is a big hurdle in each state based on to learn all those laws and everything else. And you're in Northern Virginia, correct?
Yep, that's correct. And to your point, it is very like very much based on each state, sometimes each locality in terms of how they are administering the foster care program. Some states are, at 18, that's it. There's no other formal programs. They don't have necessarily, like some states, like here in Northern Virginia, they have what's called independent living programs, which after 18, they can, go to these independent living programs that provide housing that's administered by, grants, like federal grants funded programs to provide like the housing supports. And then there's other services that are added on top. So mentorship, career services and whatnot, but not all states have that. And some of those programs will end at 21. So after that, there's no other formal programs that exist.
Well, that's unfortunate, but that actually leaves a gap, and there's probably some opportunity there, I think, where you can provide support with some additional housing options, because I know there's not a lot. Is this, I don't know much about it, and the only experience I have is with that one friend, and it's a couple of other people that have talked about it. But I know Florida is also a very unique place where you might get a stipend of a certain amount, and I don't want to equate it to Section 8 housing, because that's a whole other. I know that has its own another separate set of rules, but I would imagine them providing housing is probably much similar to it. But I think you have to be qualified to get into it. Or there, like, just walk me through that a little bit on how, like, say you're 18, how would you go about that for people that are listening that might want to know more about
that? Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it's definitely separate from the Section 8 program under HUD. There are specific programs for those that were in the foster care system. There are stipulations that kind of delineate what qualifies. And essentially, a lot of these are through an independent living program. So, as that youth or young adult is getting to that age of 18, or they're, have an emancipation from the courts, they would work with their caseworker. So that's kind of like their main liaison, their main point of contact that's kind of helping, make these connections. So they notify their caseworker that they're looking to be part of one of these independent living programs and receive a housing voucher. The federal level has a certain amount of allocation towards these housing vouchers for the foster youth programs. And then they delineate down to each state and each locality to figure out how they're appropriating that. So it gets pretty complicated, but at the very minimum, they notify their case manager, they identify a housing program, and then there's requirements in there to say, while you're in this program, you're required to attend,
Most investors don't know where they stand. Introducing Invest with Scott Kidd. Get your personalized investment readiness score. Multifamily real estate builds wealth through cash flow. You'll receive your readiness score, a personalized strategy. Join over 500 investors. Discover if you're ready. Start your free assessment today.
Whatever classes that they have available, that's anywhere from career progression, they could be going over, just kind of basic financial literacy skills. So, how you're using credit cards, how do you open a bank statement, other things such as if they don't have a driver's license yet, and they can go through programs to help them get their driver's license. If they don't even have a state ID yet, going and doing those things. So there are certain wickets that they have to be meeting, and if they are not satisfying those, then they can be removed from the program. And so there are like formal guidelines to meet these in order to receive the housing vouchers. And then once they're starting to work, so let's say they're in this independent living program, and then they get a job, then a certain portion of their income, in some cases, again, it's going to be varied from state to state, but it could be 20% of their income, it could be 10% of their income. It really depends. They're just trying to get in the habit of allocating a certain amount of your income towards your housing expenses, and then the housing voucher will cover that difference. Is kind of how these are worked. And then as you're kind of maturing through the program, your income is growing, you're getting to a point of more stability, then more of that housing expense gets shifted to that youth and young adults. So the idea is that at some point they are graduating from this, formal program and being able to live independently on their own. The gap that is happening at the moment is because there's not always a clean, each one of these youth are right at 18 and then they are maturing right at 21 and ready to be, on their own and independent and good to go. So there's a critical gap for those that are, especially here, like I see in Northern Virginia, we did a lot of different discussions with, local legislation, state legislation, other programs that are in the area, nonprofits, and have really identified that post-21, because there's no formal programs, that population kind of gets missed and unknown as to what their housing status looks like after that, their career status after that. Really just kind of, you look at Maslow's hierarchy, where are they at in safety? If you don't have safety, then you can't really establish the other levels of need. We're really looking at that critical age of 18 to 21, and then definitely after 21.
Interesting. Do you know how many, say for instance, how many people are in the foster care system, that are coming of age, say annually in Northern Virginia, just to get an idea how big this population is? It's probably a lot bigger than I imagine.
It's a lot bigger than most people would think. I could pull up the formal numbers here, but just ballparking, I do sit on multiple boards, nonprofit boards for foster youth as an advocate myself. I've done speaking engagements at the national level, state level, local level, spoken at schools and whatnot. So I'm very involved in that aspect of things. And so in any given year to date, there is at least 450,000 to 480,000 youth in care. All right, so that's anywhere from, newborn babies up to, 18 years old or whatever the federal level designates that, they are a foster youth. And so, from that number, you would just extrapolate to see, all right, well, of those, how many are, coming of age, right, 17, 18 years old. Some states you can emancipate at a certain age, maybe 16 or 17. So it can kind of skew the data, but, there are tens of thousands of youth that are, getting ready to age out of the system in any given moment.
Wow, that's quite a bit more. 480,000. That's quite a lot of people. Just so it gets you thinking that I would say even just rough numbers or anything. At 18 years old, you're probably, depending on the state and everything, you're probably looking at thousands. Every year that need this type of housing, and especially in some smaller markets, there's probably not anything available. So that's really kind of a tough situation for these young kids, and a lot of them, depending on where they are, if they're in a very rural or a very urban area, they might not be getting the life skills that they need. So I think it's great that a lot of those states do have those programs where they're learning how to open a checking account and get a driver's license and do what we call commonplace tasks that, myself as a parent, that we, help our kids with and everything. If you don't have anyone, that can be very tough. You might not even know you need an ID, because a lot of times in the foster system, I would imagine a lot of the education is lacking as well, especially if you're in the foster system.
Yeah, and from my experience in talking with others that are in the community that have aged out of the system and were not adopted, they don't really have a backstop in many cases, right? If they don't have a family that adopted them, that they can just turn back to ask a lot of those questions. Like for me, I consider myself one of the extremely fortunate ones, right? I was adopted. Granted, I was a teenager, but at least, in the years from being adopted till when I graduated high school and went out on my own, I had some of that stability to go back and ask, a lot of those questions. Right? I'm about to start college, out of state. I mean, I was going away from home 4,000 or 5,000 miles away from home with no one else that I knew there. Right? I don't know anybody in Indiana. And so asking questions of oh man, I need to open up a bank account here. I haven't done that before. What is I have a driver's license, but am I able to use it in Indiana? I don't know. I've never lived out. And so some of those things I could ask, right? I could ask my parents, or I could ask my care worker and whatnot. But for those that are, they graduate from the system without having been adopted, where is that stability, right? Unless they had maybe, someone they were close to in high school, like a teacher or a mentor or a coach or someone. I have a couple of friends in this area that's, they had some of that, and I have others that had none of that, right? They graduated the system, and maybe they got their GED, and that was that. They were kind of just on their own. They figured it out, or they didn't. And so there is a critical need there to kind of fill that gap. And it may sound well and good in some circumstances, like, yes, there are some states, there are some localities that have some of these programs, but how well are they known, right? Like, I didn't even know when I was growing up, like, and I grew up in the system for like 10 plus years, never heard of any of these programs. So, even if they exist, how well are they getting in front of the vulnerable population, in need? If a lot of this funding is coming in to these programs, are they, meeting the need and serving the community that is needing to be, in front of these?
Yeah, and that would all come down to an execution, because, a lot of times people give a lot of the money and I think it goes directly to these organizations and everything. Just real quick, like, since you're actively involved, what kind of solutions would you see that you could provide that would be helpful and share with the audience?
What if you could buy your first investment property in just 30 days? With a proven playbook built by a pro with 25 years in the game, it's not just possible, it's a plan. Scott Kidd's complete bundle gives you everything you need. 7 professional tools, delivered instantly, no fluff, no guesswork. Just the exact roadmap to your first property. From yacht captain to managing director of capital markets, Scott Kidd has navigated deals most investors only dream about. Now he's handing you his full playbook. If you're a high earner who keeps researching but never pulling the trigger, if you feel overwhelmed by the process, this was built specifically for you. Virtual walkthrough guide and the napkin deal calculator. Inside, the 30-day checklist property locator playbook. By box builder, market scorecard, agent vetting script. And right now, free bonus access to all tools, including the Portfolio Investor Clarity tool. Visit investwithscottkidd.com and get the bundle today. Your first property starts now.
With the audience, because I think, myself being a business owner and being a captain and everything, we're always very solution minded, and you solve the problem, but you don't necessarily solve the problem without having the right execution.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and having that kind of open mind of like, how can we as a community kind of come together and provide various solutions. So from my perspective, and what I'm doing with the foundation I'm building called formerly Fostered Forever Loved, we are taking an approach that, we don't plan to be the end-all, be-all solution in the community that we're in. But what we do plan is, how can we highlight and elevate the work that's already being done by others, right? Create natural collaboration efforts, and essentially create a blueprint of like how, if someone is wanting to do this in Kansas City, and I'm doing this in Northern Virginia, they can just kind of pick up the blueprint that we are doing and find like networks in their own communities. So one of the core aspects of this all, right, not just pertaining to foster youth, but any social need that people are looking at, right? Like, I'm a veteran myself. If we're looking at helping the veteran population, right? If those that are looking to help, at-risk, abusive homes and whatnot, right? Like, you can apply the same framework. And so at its core, you want to be hearing and elevating the voices of those that are in need. So in my case, I would be going and talking with other youth and young adults, right, with their consents, working, if they have case managers, I'd be working with them, if whatever formal programs, right, like having that direct dialogue to hear from their perspective, right? Because I haven't been in the system for like however many years now, right? Like, it's been 15, 18, I don't even know how long it's been. It's been a while since I personally was in the system. And so there's going to be a lot of things that have changed since then. Policy has changed, right? Funding has changed, right? The way these programs are administered are changed. But what you can get is like from the perspective of those that are most recently affected by the system and by the programs that are around. And so one, kind of being present and elevating those voices and letting that be known. 2, looking at, what are the surrounding communities for that population. And so in this case, it could be, all right, figuring out what state programs are available, what local programs are available, what other nonprofits are out there, what are they bringing to the table. All right, well, this program is bringing career counseling services. This other program is bringing, maybe they're helping. I've seen programs that have like donations of like suits and whatnot. Other programs that are helping with, maybe vocational schooling instead of going like the path of college. And so kind of having an idea of what that network looks like and, kind of making that known to this population directly and making it easy for them to identify what it is that they need and having it right in front of them of like, all right, well, here's that connection. You can talk with them directly, or we can help you, or we can work with your case manager to help you get set up on those services. And then identifying what those housing gaps are. And, in our circumstance, we found out that, this population age, right, 21 plus has like a big gap, and there's no one that's filling that. And so now with all of that in mind, we are trying to position ourselves. My partners and I in this nonprofit, we bring a big real estate experience background to it. I have like the personal advocacy, lived experience as a foster youth that I bring to the table. And, we're planning to work collaboratively with other organizations that can bring some of those other pieces, right? Maybe they have social work services, therapeutic services as well, right, to support their mental health and transition. Maybe there's other programs that can provide, dietitian and nutrition kind of experience and background to help youth learn how to go grocery shopping and make meals, right? Like that's another, basic skill set. And so that's kind of really the approach at the heart is to be collaborative, right? And, in each of these levels, but at the core kind of put the population that you're serving, at the center forefront of that and kind of elevate their voices and their need.
That sounds really great because, I know in a lot of organizations, especially, nationwide, especially federal organizations, just because it's a federal organization, a lot of the branches don't necessarily talk to each other. And I think if you had open forums with communication and stuff that, that it would really help share a lot of great ideas that, because if what works in one area may not work in one other, but parts of it might, and I think it's with everyone being deeply connected on social media and all around, it could be easily implemented having some kind of national, forum or something where people could get on and speak to each other in groups. And, I think that's so great that you're actually doing that, and what do you see just in the short term that other people can do to help out?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I certainly think, there's such, great utility to have kind of that open dialogue. I think it's very important for people to come to the table with an open mind and be willing to, accept feedback, right? It could be good feedback, could be negative feedback, but feedback is feedback. And if we are thinking, again, the core, community that we're serving, then any differences that people have, I think, we can kind of work past that. And so what we have been seeing as like a near-term way that people can support what we're doing is one, kind of just follow along. I post a lot about what we're doing on my social media. I have a newsletter where I kind of share updates about, what we're doing. So just staying plugged in. And there will be opportunities that, we're going to be looking to, raise funds for, different housing developments that we're doing. We're planning to get, we're working with a program right now where we put a proposal out to see, they have a need that they're looking to have, a larger housing portfolio in order to service the population they have, because it's growing, right? The amount of youth that are in the system that are aging out, that's growing, and it's difficult for them to kind of keep up, right, with getting enough housing. And so what we're doing is we're going through and kind of finding those houses that we can fix up and provide for these youth and young adult population. So there will be opportunities where we can have people that are looking, that have a mission-oriented way of giving and investing in communities to be able to have that direct impact and see the immediate results that we have on people's lives.
Well, that's really great. I would imagine if people wanted to help, they could definitely just look around in their local area and see what types of programs like this exist. Because I know very little about it, and this has been really great. It's been pretty enlightening, and I've got some things that I'll definitely some ideas potentially that how I could help you, introduce you to a few other people, and it's all it really takes is just a few connections, and might be the next thing that we all need, especially what it's such a great cause and such a great thing that you're doing. So for people that
are you investing blind? Most passive investors don't know what questions to ask, and it costs them dearly. That's why I put together 125 essential questions. The ultimate due diligence checklist for apartments, syndications, and funds. Cover every critical area: the operator's track record, the loan structure and refinancing risk, property condition and capital needs, market demographics and competition. Ask things like, how many assets have gone through a full cycle? What is the loan-to-value ratio? What is the break-even occupancy? This is the checklist sophisticated investors use, and now it's yours free. Get instant access at investwithscottkid.com interactive. Trackable, exportable to PDF. Protect your capital. Invest with confidence.
People that don't know about you and what you're working on, how can they, if they want to find out more about what you're doing, what's the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, best way to find me is, I would say the biggest platform that I'm on right now is LinkedIn. So you can just find me, just search my name, Dairius Kawewehi, and I post every day things that I'm doing, personal life in terms of my real estate portfolio, things that I've been learning kind of across my journey. I'm extremely transparent. I even share a lot of the ways that I've made mistakes. And learn from it. How I take, what I've done in the military and, transcended that to how I operate within real estate, how I operate within my nonprofit. I'm an endurance athlete. I'm competing to train in, to compete in an Ironman that's coming up this summer. So I share a lot of that on LinkedIn itself. I have a personal newsletter that's from my company, Akamai Property Group, that I share, again, a little bit of what I do on LinkedIn, but way more detail, share a lot of my frameworks that I've been using for the past several years, and just kind of give that out as resources to the community. And then, if you want to see my face, I'm also on Instagram as well, so you can see a lot of things that I share there.
That's really great.
Is my Instagram.
What is it called?
Metals and rentals. So metals, doing marathons or triathlons.
Metals and rentals. That's right, because you do the that's great. That's great. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this great story. And I look forward to having you back on again and following up and seeing, how the journey is going. And I will be following up you and seeing how potentially I could help with everything that you got going. So I think it's such a great cause, and I think, I really commend you for what you're doing, because you come from experience, and it's something that people really need. And it's just yet another segment of society that we don't want to fall through the cracks. We want everybody to be a part of everything else. So, well, thank you so much for being on.
Hey, thank you so much, Scott. And, I appreciate being able to share with your great community here.
Well, thanks again. And I'm Scott Kidd, the Yacht Captain Investor Podcast. And just a reminder, the best investment you can make is the one you make in yourself. So invest heavily in you, and we'll see you next time.